Summer in Glen Ellyn was the kind of quiet that made you forget danger existed. Tree-lined streets, kids on bikes, the air thick with the smell of barbecue and cut grass. But for 15-year-old Kristy Wesselman, that peace ended one Sunday afternoon. A walk so ordinary it should have been forgotten by nightfall. Instead, it became a 30-year echo that haunted an entire community. This is not just a story about tragedy. It's about patience, persistence, and the moment when science finally whispered what witnesses couldn't. The day everything changed. July 21st, 1985. Kristy told her mom she was walking to a nearby store, just a short trip to buy candy and soda. Less than a mile away, maybe a 20-minute walk. She slipped on her sneakers, smiled, and said she'd be right back. But she never came home. When she didn't return that evening, her mother started calling friends, then neighbors, and finally the police. By sunset, search parties were out. Flashlights sweeping across fields, volunteers shouting her name into the dark. By the next morning, a police officer found her body in a field near the prairie path, just a few hundred yards from her home. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed multiple times. A shoelace was tied tightly around her neck. The discovery shattered Glen Ellyn's sense of safety. It was the kind of community where kids rode their bikes until dusk, where nothing truly bad was supposed to happen. Parents started locking doors. Kids weren't allowed to walk alone anymore. The illusion of safe suburbia was gone overnight. The investigation. Detectives worked around the clock. Over 100 people were questioned. Neighbors, friends, delivery drivers, anyone who might have seen something. But every lead went cold. In 1985, DNA testing was more theory than reality. Fingerprints and blood types could rule someone out, but not confirm guilt. The evidence, hair, fibers, biological samples, was carefully sealed, preserved, and filed away, waiting for a future that could make sense of it. The newspapers called it the murder that stole Glen Ellyn's innocence. For Kristy's family, it was the murder that stole their world. Her mother, Janine, refused to give up. She called the police regularly, asking if there was any news. Every time the answer was the same: no new leads. She once said, "I thought if I just kept calling, one day they'd tell me they found him." But the phone never rang with that call. The case went cold. The decades of silence. The years turned into decades. The 80s faded into the 90s into the 2000s. The world changed, but for Janine Wesselman, time seemed frozen in 1985. Kristy's classmates grew up, moved away, started families. But Janine stayed in the same house, the same quiet street, the same distance from that fateful field. Every day, she lived within sight of where her daughter's life had ended. By the mid-1990s, DNA profiling had become standard police work. But when DuPage County investigators reopened the case, the technology wasn't still sensitive enough. Samples degraded, databases incomplete. Hope rose, then dimmed again. Years later, the evidence was sent for retesting, using improved forensic methods. This time, the scientists were able to extract a clean DNA profile, a perfect genetic fingerprint of the killer. But there was a catch. When they ran it through the national database, it didn't match anyone. The profile just sat there, waiting. For another decade, silence.
The breakthrough. Then, in September of 2015, 30 years after Kristy's murder, the waiting finally ended. Investigators received a match from the state crime lab. The DNA belonged to Michael R. Jones, a 62-year-old man already serving time for another sexual assault. The odds of a false match? 1 in 1.5 quadrillion. In other words, impossible. Michael Jones had lived an unremarkable life in Champaign, Illinois. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, the kind of man who minded his own business. But the DNA told another story, one that began on a warm summer afternoon in 1985. When police knocked on his door, Jones didn't resist. He knew what it meant when they said Kristy's name. For the detectives who had carried this case their entire careers, it was the moment they dreamed of. For Janine, it was the call she'd been waiting 30 years to hear. The trial. Jones was charged with murder and aggravated sexual assault. In court, prosecutors presented the evidence, the DNA, the autopsy, the timeline that finally made sense. After decades of mystery, every piece clicked into place. Witnesses described the scene, the horror of that day, the endless years of uncertainty. Janine sat in the courtroom holding a photo of Kristy, her daughter frozen in time, 15 forever. In 2018, Michael Jones pleaded guilty. The judge sentenced him to 80 years in prison. He would never walk free again. For the first time in 33 years, Janine could finally breathe. She told reporters, "Justice was slow, but it came, and maybe now Kristy can rest." The legacy of a cold case. The murder of Kristy Wesselman became a symbol, not just of loss, but of endurance. Her case showed that even when the world forgets, evidence remembers. Time can't erase DNA. Forensic science has evolved from blood typing to full genetic mapping. What once took months now takes hours. And in every cold case file, there's a sliver of hope that somewhere, some strand of DNA will light up a computer screen and bring a killer to justice. Kristy's case became a study in persistence. Detectives could have given up. They didn't. Her mother could have stopped asking. She never did. Because justice doesn't expire. It only waits. The broader picture. Across the United States, over 200,000 murders remain unsolved. Behind every one of those case numbers is a face, a family, a story left unfinished. Kristy's story reminds us that the past is never fully buried. It lingers in evidence lockers, in sealed envelopes, in frozen vials marked with a case number and a date. And with every technological breakthrough, new databases, familial DNA, genealogy tracing, the walls of silence crack a little more. Kristy's killer might have believed he got away with it. For 30 years, he did. But the truth has patience, and science, it turns out, has a very long memory. Justice delayed, but not denied. She was 15. She went for candy, and she changed the way we pursue the truth. Kristy's story teaches us that even when cases grow cold, they never truly freeze. Somewhere in a lab, under fluorescent light, evidence is waiting. And when the right scientist, detective, or technology comes along, the past speaks again. In a world obsessed with speed, this case is a reminder that patience can be powerful. Justice may take time, but it never stops moving, because the truth, like DNA, never dies.